I met my guest in a secret place, one of the many underground bars in Imperial City. A trick to get past the Vigiles Urbani and the military is by hiding in one of the places they already turn a blind eye. The Undercity is vast. Underground bars is a place where it is legally gray enough that the Imperial City can escape the pressure above, but not so dangerous that they wouldn't go. The bar we're in is unique for being an underground bar that doesn't serve alcohol. There are dispensers with cereal, local pop on tap, freshly baked cake, cupcakes, brownies, and cookies. One may ask why there is an underground dessert bar underneath a bookstore, where there can be a bar that serves actual legal chems or booze to dose yourself on. In all honesty, it was once an illegal hideout for our gang, but as the gang opened up a patisserie as a front, they fell in love with making desserts, and many of these illegal hideouts turned into a mostly legal dessert bar and bakery. I sit in a corner where I quietly read from a comic I brought from the bookstore above and drink from a lavender latte while I wait for my guest to arrive. When Dylan arrives, he looks nervous. His hands twitch and his steel is around his right middle finger. I wave at him and he comes over. As he sits across from me, the waitress comes by to take our orders. We ordered several desserts, some lime chips, an orange soda, and a cranberry soda. At first Dylan is nervous someone will listen, until I point out that the dessert bar is empty. It is 11 a.m. on a Wednesday. There aren't any other guests. Privacy is assured by hiding in plain sight. As I sip on my orange soda and Dylan sipped on his cranberry soda, we discussed a few other subjects before we talked about what happened in Imperial City all those years ago. As Dylan explains, he fiddles with his ring, and I take notes as he speaks about his encounter in Imperial City. Dylan has been a hero for a long time, but this story took place as he was just starting out. Imperial City is full of darkness and blood-sucking, though usually of a political nature. What Dylan encountered all those years ago was a dark bloodsucker of a literal nature. An inauspicious start to his hero career, but one that interests me greatly. After my grandfather's death, Sentinel was in my care. Even though I knew how it was supposed to work, using it was something else. The ring was unobtrusive, almost fashionable, but the power it gave me was unlike anything I dreamed of. Suddenly, things that were a physical struggle were easy for me to handle. Laps that usually took me 9 minutes to run took less than 22 seconds to run. I stopped getting tired from my chores, and I felt like there was no limit to what I could lift. As time went on, I learned how to draw out the strength Sentinel gave me, but more importantly, I learned how to turn it off too. The ring gave me great strength, but it only increased strength and endurance that was already there. It would have been easy to become dependent on the ring's strength for all of my problems, but it felt like my grandfather's words were guiding me there. Better to increase your base level of strength, find out where your upper limits are at first before you break them. So I went on regular walks, went to the gym, helped out around the house as I prepared for college. Graduating from high school was an intense experience, and for a while, the time didn't feel real. It was just preparing for a future that was always coming, but at the same time was never real. Now it was here, it just felt unreal. It was easier for me to focus on improving myself and my skills with Sentinel than it was to think about my dorms and the many papers for college. So after my exercise routines, I would go into the woods to where I could bring Sentinel out in force without fear of scaring anyone else. My grandfather called Sentinel a sword, but I learned that was a bit of a misnomer. Even if its first form was a sword, the fact that I could change its shape at will, even making armor around myself while I could use it as a sword, axe, or even a halberd. It was the most comfortable in my hand as a sword, but Sentinel could be in many pieces, and through experimentation, I learned that as long as I touched one piece of Sentinel, I could wield its power, and I could summon pieces of Sentinel to me, as long as I held on to at least one piece. I don't know why no one else before me he hasn't figured that little trick out, but it was one I was more than happy to exploit. For example, I learned that I could drop the sword and I could call the sword back to my hand like a hammer from myth, at least if it's within 10 meters of myself. If it's beyond that, it feels a bit like something is missing from myself. Beyond 10 meters, it also doesn't fly back into my hand. It dissolves into mist and joins back into the rest of the Sentinel. I also wanted to finish up my part-time job in the 24-hour grocery store in Imperial City. The pay isn't super great, but savings comes in handy when going to a new place. Plus, it feels good to do something so normal. My father never really went to work, and it helped quiet my mind when I'm at work. The night shift is a great place to stack cans, lift heavy crates, and just being out at night helps me find a bit of peace. Before you ask how I avoided getting tired, connecting the Sentinel kept me from being tired. It was like getting a full night's rest and a cup of coffee all at once. Surprising how many more hours you have in a day when you can't sleep. But it was when I was working the night shift I noticed something strange. Working the night shift in a grocery store, you get used to weird things happening. I've seen an entire group of punk drag queens enter the grocery store, then head into the bathroom, and then they came out a few minutes later covered in pink dresses, makeup, and glitter, where they all bought a 4-pack of energy drinks before leaving, never to be seen again. That entire process took less than 10 minutes, which was very strange because the bathrooms need a key to open after 10 p.m. I've also seen people walk into the store talking to themselves the entire time, looking over every item in the store before leaving, not buying a single thing, and taking one of each thing from the samples plates. Some of them look homeless, but quite a few of them look like political figures. Some of them were even wearing purple. I learned very quickly not to ask why the governor of Imperial City kept coming into the bakery, take bite-sized cupcakes, while the live television showed the governor giving a speech. Just leave them alone, and they'll leave. Eventually. I've also actually seen normal families shopping for groceries at 1 a.m., where they all act completely normal, and they wouldn't be out of place at 1 p.m., but they're out at 1 a.m. These are the strangest people. They all act normal and they don't act out of place. So you wonder what is going on in their life that they have to shop at a 24-hour grocery store at 1 a.m., picking up jars of pasta with the addicts staring at the deboned chicken. So, at first, the customer was just another strange customer. A woman and her daughter walked into the store, swaying around while they walked through the store. Again, not too unusual. It's late at night, people tend to be tired. I watched as the mother and daughter walked down the alcohol aisle. The mother grabbed an aluminum bottle of blackberry wine and she carried it in her hand, letting it drop for a minute as she walked down the aisle further before the bottle fell to the ground. That drew my attention as I began to walk down the aisle to make sure everything was okay, but I realized it wasn't just the bottle that fell to the floor. I saw that the hand was still attached to the bottle, but the mother was still standing. Her hand fell off and she was still walking forward. She kept walking forward. Her hand still twitching, the bones on the end were yellow, but curiously free of blood, but still wet with a thin layer of slime. "Are you all right?" I called up to the woman who paused and swayed, turning around to face me, where she responded, "I'm all right." Now that I had a clear look at her and her daughter's face, I felt my spine chill. Her face looked normalish, but it also looked like clay shaped into a human face, but starting to droop. My first thought was she was having a stroke as I reached for my radio to call in the vanguard, when I saw her eyes. Her eyes were clouded over and had no spark behind them, reminding me of my grandfather's eyes when he died. Her daughter's eyes were identical, but unlike drooping clay, her face was too tight and too tense. Her lips were pulled back, revealing all of her dry teeth and tongue dangling out of her mouth. Her eyelids were peeled back and her eyes were very dry, being both bugged out and shriveled in her sockets. Something was very wrong with them both. "Stay right there. I'm going to call the vanguard. We'll get you some help," I said as I pushed the emergency button on my radio. As the emergency line connected, but the woman spoke again. "Don't worry about us. We're not a bother," she said as she stepped towards me with her broken ulna and radius bones pointing towards me, as her other hand gripped onto her daughter's hand. She took step after step towards me as I tried to explain what was happening. When her jagged bones stabbed into my shirt, I thought she was just confused and trying to reach out to me. "Just hold on, I'm getting you some help," I told her, only to have her step even closer to have the broken bones pushing into my skin. "Tell them it was a mistake. Let us go," he hissed at me, and for a moment I was confused. Why would she say a false alarm when both her and her daughter were clearly in need of medical attention? And as the bone kept sticking into my stomach, I realized what she was trying to do. She was trying to threaten me. Sentinel's power was flowing through me, so her bone didn't even break the skin, but still I wanted to help her. "Back off, we're getting you help," I told her as my hand was now on her shoulder, trying to keep her from getting even closer as I gave the address to the Vanguard technician, who told me someone would be there in 4 minutes. I nodded and I told the woman and her daughter, "They'll be here in a couple of minutes. Just wait here," I said as some of my strength was used to hold her back. I didn't notice that her daughter had something in my hand until it was stabbed into my thigh. Or rather, she tried to stab it into my thigh. The small blade broke off, cutting off my work shorts, and I could feel the scratch, but it was like being scratched by someone's fingernail. It hurts, but it doesn't quite break the skin. "How? Why did you do that?" I asked her, who only stared up with me with her eyes. I wasn't sure were actually seeing me. "What are you?" she asked in a voice that made me think I wasn't dealing with exoteric weirdos, but a more esoteric kind. That in my mind, my heart rate accelerated and the thought wiggled in the back of my mind. Kill them now. Don't say who they are. Make Sentinel into a sword, swing my blade, and their heads would be on the floor. They would not be a threat to me anymore. I pushed that thought back. I wasn't a violent person. Even if they tried to hurt me, Sentinel was keeping me safe. I want to help them, not hurt them. If I let myself choose violence instead of helping people, it would be too easy to let myself justify hurting other people instead of helping. I've heard enough stories from my mother about how my father behaved, and how his arguments started with a justification. He yelled at them because they cut him off in traffic. He followed them in the parking lot because they drove their car too close to her. He broke their tail lights because they were going to hurt someone else. It always started with a simple justification. something that sounded rational for a few seconds, but it would soon no longer need justification. They shouldn't have made me mad. They were assholes. They should have just sold it to me. Wouldn't have stolen it if they weren't charging so much for it. Something that might sound rational to yourself, but said out loud, it sounds like the most ridiculous thing ever. And then it becomes something more twisted. It became him bragging about stalking his teachers, about how he sent someone to the hospital who was too scared to tell the police who sent him there, where he came home washing blood off his knuckles and he wouldn't bother explaining what happened. It wasn't even worth considering because it happened so much. She told me a lot about how I reminded her of him growing up, and now I keep guarding my anger. Even in this moment where they're trying to hurt me, I am guarding my own anger. My first thought was to hurt them back, a thought I was ashamed to have, and I kept trying to focus myself as someone who's helping. Here I was trying to help someone who tried to stab me. If I couldn't protect myself, then could I ever protect myself? I shoved these angry thoughts down as I tried to force a smile. Don't worry, Vanguard will help, I said as I let go of their hands, and they tried to tear at me. Tearing at my clothes and skin, I held them back, waiting for the Vanguard to arrive. Every swipe at me boiled my blood even more. I could feel the heat pound behind my eyes, and every cell in my body was screaming at me to fight back, to just reach out and snap their necks with my hands. It would be easy. I had the power to do so, and all I had to do was just reach out. Restraint is strength, not fury. Be strong enough to be gentle, I repeated to myself, hearing my grandfather's words echo as I did so. I kept my grip on their shoulders, holding them back as they started to aspirate black foam from their mouths and noses, as they struggled towards me before they finally collapsed, just as the vanguard arrived. Three medical technicians came into the store, rushing past me to feel the pulse of the collapsed mother and daughter. I stood back as they tried to revive the two slumped over bodies. They tried chest compressions, adrenaline, and even tried the defibrillation paddles. It still didn't work. They remained still and their hearts didn't start. They only leaked more of that dark semi-solid where the needles injected, and more black foam aspirated from their lungs as the medical technicians tried to restart their hearts. After a few minutes, it was confirmed they were dead, as they were brought out of the store by body bags. The severed hand and wine were taken away in smaller bags. As they left, they had me fill out an incident report. Fun fact, emergency medical technicians do not clean up the mess left behind by dead bodies. Even as I filled out the form and the technicians spoke among themselves about how odd it was, they did not share why it was weird to me. They just had me fill out the forms while one of them murmured that this was the 12th similar call they've had that night. When the EMTs left, I began to rope off the section of the store with the body fluids left behind on it. I was not trained to clean up biohazards, and that would be a problem for my boss to deal with because he wasn't picking up his phone. The store procedures for people like me was to rope it off with cones and pour the cleaning powder on it, so the smell was covered and people thought it was a normal spill. Biohazard cleanup is supposed to be done by management, who was home tonight and not picking up their phone, or by a professional biohazard team, which was managed by the owner. So that left the aisle in the weird halfway state of not really cleaned up, but just cleaned up enough to be a problem for any other possible customers that were coming in. Still, I only had a couple of hours left until the end of my shift, and I filled out the incident report, and did my due diligence. Not even 30 minutes after the vanguard left, I had another customer come in. This one, a swaying man in a purple tie. His hair was prim and proper, and even though his suit was ruffled, it was clearly expensive and well cared for. His skin was pale, and he held his hand to his neck like he had a crick in it. He stepped up to my register for a moment, swaying as I waited for him to speak. I am used to seeing politicians in all sorts of states in the grocery store. Some of them behave just like how you expect a royal to behave. Others behave like a rabid possum that lost a fight against a rabid raccoon over a rabid squirrel. So, a swaying member of the royal family standing before my register was nothing new or even that unexpected to me. Evening, my lord. How can I assist you tonight? I asked the royal I did not recognize, who asked one word. Phone, he wheezed, barely even coherent enough to say, let alone recognize what it was. I pointed to the back of the store where the payphone was. Just avoid aisle 4, it's not clean, I told him, just as he staggered down that exact aisle to get to the phone. Let me know if you need anything, my lord. I called down the aisle as I continued to read over the employee handbook to see what we do in the case of a customer disturbing a closed-off area. As I read over the line saying to spread more cleaning powder, the automated doors opened again as another man entered the store. His suit was sharp, his tie was purple, and his hair proper, and he walked with the air of someone who was never questioned a single day in his life. But his face was identical to the man who came in before, right down to the look in his eyes and the same pale pallor. Hello, my brother is a little lost, and I think he came into the store. Can you please tell me if you've seen him? He looks just like me. The royal asked me, and I nodded, pointing down where the payphone was at. It should be on the payphone, but please, my lord, avoid aisle 4. That aisle is still not clean. I told the royal, who nodded at my words and began to make his way up aisle 3. Thank you so much. We will be out of your hair soon, the royal brother said as he went up the aisle, and I kept reading for a few seconds. At first, I thought how strange it was to get two royals, one right after the other, and one of them even said thank you to me. At that realization, my blood ran cold and I dropped the employee handbook. I pushed the silent alarm that was calling the police, and it locked the automatic doors and silently dropped the gates over the glass cases. I felt Sentinel in my right hand wake up, metal sliding up my arm from my ring, forming my armor, and the sword extended in my right hand at my realization. There were very few moments in your life like that. Moments where you become certain that you are in danger. And not just in danger, but in immediate danger. And there's no way you are mistaking it for anything else. The moment that years of paranoia and fear all prepare you for. The moment that you are going to either be a hero or die trying. The second royal thanked me. Royals don't thank peasants like me. They don't bother using manners with someone like me. I'm just a peasant to them, and thanking me would be a waste of breath, and in royal society, it is often seen as a sign of weakness, acknowledging even for a moment that the peasant did something special for you. I've seen all kinds of royalty in the store before. Even at their drunkest, where they are half naked and making out with the blobfish in the tanks, they don't bother to use manners with me. Whoever that second man was, he wasn't royalty. And if he isn't royalty and he's wearing purple, looking for the other man, then he's a threat. Now clad in my armor and my sword in hand, I headed down aisle 3, moving as quickly as I could. The armor isn't quiet, and trying to be stealthy wouldn't help at all. When I made it to the alcove where the phone was at, I saw two men on the floor, both pointing at each other, equally disheveled, and both of them were losing a lot of blood from a wound on their chests. Both of them are identical and both unable to speak. And when I saw the wound, what happened clicked in my head. A vampire, the kind that can create puppets from their dead victims in the form of ghouls, undead minions that last for a few days before they completely fall apart, and some vampires can even take the form of someone they drank blood from. Whatever this vampire was, it was trying to replace the royal, and now here I was interrupting the process, and I would have to figure out who was who. Kill them both. That thought pervaded my mind. The wisdom of Sentinel told me that was the case, that killing them both would fix my problems, and it was so strong. Every voice inside of Sentinel seemed to agree on that. That if it was a threat, I would have to kill it before it killed me. That realization hit me, and the wisdom came with it. If this was the advice that Sentinel was giving me, then I knew what I would need to do to find out who was real and who was the vampire. I calmed the storm in my mind, and I dropped the sword to the ground and kicked it past them both. If I was correct, I could predict the vampire's next choice. And sure enough, the man further from the phone lunged towards me faster than I could track, and his fingers dug deep into my forearms so tightly that even through the mental of the sentinel greaves I could feel the pressure. And the vampire opened its mouth to reveal the sharp fangs inside as it lunged for my neck underneath my long hair. I pressed my hand against the vampire's chest as there was the sound of something sharp pressing into the flesh and the steady drip of blood hitting the floor. I couldn't see the vampire's face from this angle, but I could definitely sense his confusion as he pulled back. His fangs were broken and his teeth shattered from trying to bite through my gorget, protecting me from the bite and hidden underneath my long hair. And my hand pressed against his chest, the sword was stabbed through. I called back the sword to my hand while it was pressed against the vampire. Naturally, this meant that the vampire was thoroughly impaled, and the sword was back in my hand as I let Sentinel take over a bit, slicing thoroughly right and left, leaving the vampire in two separate halves on the floor. The top half no longer looked like the royal, as it struggled to crawl away, while the legs kept twitching for a few moments, and the entrails squirmed on the floor like headless snakes. "You're not going anywhere," I said in a voice that I didn't recognize as I pressed the tip of the sword against the heart from the back. This felt familiar, like I've done it many times, knowing exactly where the heart would be and how to reach it from the back. I pressed my blade into the chest. It only took a few centimeters, and then the vampire stopped moving. I knew, deep inside of myself, that it was dead. I could hear the police rattle the front gates, and the royal was passed out as I let the armor and sword fade back into my ring. I was going to have a lot of incident reports to fill out that night. A guest has finished his drink and he waits for another. There is silence before he explains that his boss never bothered to install working cameras, but with two different incidents in the same night, one of them involving one of the lords nearly dying and him being unreachable, resulted in his boss being fired by the owner. The lord had no memories from that night due to blood loss, and Dylan soon after quit his job to focus on preparing for college full-time. I still remember the way it felt, knowing exactly how to kill the vampire, and it was easy, far too easy. I didn't even think about it. I just trusted Sentinel to know what to do, and it did. There's been times where trusting Sentinel had helped me. There's been times where trusting it harmed me. So ultimately, it became a challenge of knowing what to do. Do I trust the wisdom of those who came before me, or do I trust myself? It isn't an easy answer, and it's often a case by case basis, but I do know that I have to keep learning. My own skills, my own wisdom, is added to Sentinel, so I have to trust myself, and that, dearest friend, is one of the hardest things I've ever done. We continued to eat sweets for a while, and when I asked about him going to college in San LaSalle, the only thing he told me that it was a story for another time, and as we finished our food, we left at separate times and only left behind a single denarii to pay for the food and leave a silent reminder to the owners. We were never here, and it would be better to forget us, which will be easy for them when they don't ask for names.